Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I am Elizabeth Portanova, the Director of Marketing and Events at Hauser and Wirth. We're so glad that you are here to join us for this special preview performance of Manifesto 7, a new work composed by Charles Gaines and the latest iteration of his incredible Manifesto series. These captivating performance-based installations draw upon historical texts, uniting the rational, mathematical, and lyrical structures of music with the irrationality of racial tensions and social injustice. The series has been performed at museums and art institutions throughout the country, including MoMA, the Phoenix Art Museum, Red Cat, and the Hammer. So we are very fortunate to be able to host this special preview, which Charles developed during his residency in Somerset within his extraordinary exhibition, Numbers and Trees, the Tanzania Baobabs. In this preview performance that we'll experience tonight, Charles examines the rulings from two landmark US Supreme Court cases, Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, and Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. The first case set the separate but equal precedent, providing the legal basis for Jim Crow laws, and the second case overturned it. Both cases bookending a period of legalized segregation in the United States. After the two-part performance, we invite you to stick around for a brief conversation between Charles and John Eagle, the music director and editor, followed by a short Q&A, so please have your questions ready. Now please, let's give a warm welcome to the performers.
What common legal practice this consolidated? Plessy Ferguson, contrary to its minding, is rejected. We conclude that the field of education, this doctrine has no place. Is unequal. We hope that the plaintiffs are deprived of the protection of the
Thank you, everyone, so much for being here. And thank you, Charles, for sharing this work with us. And I know this work is very hot off the presses, so to speak. So I was wondering if you want to share with us a quick rundown of a little bit about how you created the piece, these Manifestos pieces in general, but also about your time at the Somerset residency and putting this piece together in the last month.
Yeah, I have to thank Hauser and Wirth for tolerating me, generally. But for giving me the opportunity to go to their Somerset facility where there's a gallery and shops and restaurant. But there's also a residency there that they let me work for 4 weeks to actually develop this piece. It was an idea that there should be a closing performance to this exhibition. And since the Manifestos is a performative work as well as an installational work, we thought maybe I should write a new piece, and I did.
That's just like that. So these pieces, just like your grid pieces and everything, has a system behind it. Would you like to give a quick overview of how that system works, going from a piece of text to something like what we just heard?
Oh, sure, yeah. And it's important that I let everybody know about the fact that the work is pretty much generated by a system, principally to set up an interesting contrast to the sort of the emotional and affective experience that's produced by the work, because we don't usually think that systems can do that. So it's simply that I adopted an old Baroque system of translating text into music. And the code is simple. It's all the letters that are used in the alphabet from A to G are turned into musical notes. And I include H because during the Baroque period, one of the Bachs who used this system was honored by having H converted to B flat. So B flat is an additional note that I use in the system. And simply I go through a text and letter by letter, convert the letter to a note. So the letters that are used in the alphabet that are used in musical notation are converted to notes, and the letters that are not used in musical notation are converted to silent beats and rests. So I should say that John helps me there, because I mean, it's a very laborious process, and I'd rather John do it than I. And so I get this, what I call the raw manuscript. And it is a conversion of a text that usually in the Manifesto series is a political text of some sort. And so I edit the text down to maybe 200 or 300 words, because these texts these manifestos, they're usually like 10, 20,000 words. So I can't use that. So I edit it into the most salient part, and then do the raw, what I call the raw translation from that. When I receive the translation, I play it measure by measure, until I hear what I think is a melody. It's very similar to looking at an ink blot and seeing birds flying over Hawaii. You know, you're subjectively interpreting what it is that you see, and in this case, I'm interpreting what I hear. Once I hear a melody that's produced by it, then I develop it into an ensemble composition. In this case, the ensemble is a string quartet plus piano, plus voice. And then there are certain rules that I have to obey. Like, one is that I have to work only with the notes that are given to me and not add notes or subtract notes. And I have to also use the chords that are provided. So that what these constraints do is that it keeps me from digressing down certain passionate paths that I might perceive intuitively. It constrains that because it forces me to follow the patterns that are produced by the text. And the other rule is simply that I can, once I develop a melody, I can expand it or contract it in any manner and way that I want. This is essentially a description of a sort of collaboration between a rigorous intellectual system and a psychological subjective process.
Yeah, and I guess I want to I want to ask you more about that kind of latter point you brought up, that, like, you know, as you said, you're not composing a melody from scratch. You are using the system to generate material for you. But then, of course, being someone who has the pleasure of seeing the translation as it exists in its first state, where it is, you know, it's generated by a system. It's not the most musical thing in the world necessarily, like what we're used to experiencing anyway. But then we end up with something like this, that you are working within constraints, you are working with the material that's been given to you, and yet a voice comes through so clearly, and so clearly yours. And can you talk about a little bit about that stage of the process, when you are, and I guess, and what that means within the larger system itself of generating the work?
Yes, and I might put people to sleep with this, but please. The reason I work with through and with systems is to create a firewall between my subjective judgment and intuitive judgments, and in the decisions that I make in making a work of art. So it's sort of like taking my impulses, my intuitions out of the game in the original formation of the work. So that's why I work with systems. It's kind of a different kind of playing with chance. It's the opportunity for me to interact with something that I cannot predict. But once I have it, and then I can, as I said with the Rorschach example, can interpret it. Also part of the system is that I work with a diatonic scale. And the scale is produced in order to be produce melodic and harmonious sound. There are a number of different scales, and this is just one Western scale that I work with. So one of the big things that people said that the music is so, the music and actually the art where the same operation operates, that the system determines the image that you see. People are surprised that it is so effective or beautiful, because there's the assumption that if you use an arbitrary system to produce something, then usually chaos is produced from that, and which I have absolutely very interested in chaotic music. So it's not the issue. The issue is that I wanted to show that a contrary proposition. We're taught that the reason affect is produced in music or in art and the other forms is because it comes from our subjectivity. It comes from what is unique within us. And I want to show that this is not true. I want to show that it's not only comes from culture, but it's a product from the general culture and our individual cultural learning. That we receive information from culture individually. Different people have different experiences. But these experiences that we have are responding to things that are given to us, not things that we invent. And so it's in a way, the system is like culture, the process of culture. And our individualism, in the case of the way I compose these things, our individualism is interpreting what is given to us by culture, but interpreting them with a language, or through a language that is also given to us by culture, in order to sort of subtract it from this notion of this unfettered subjectivity. And this is related to the music because of the the pieces themselves, because I regard the idea that art is an aesthetic process that's produced by subjectivity. I regard that not as a transcendentalism or a universal construct, but I regard that as a political statement, as an ideological statement, where in fact we're heavily informed by what we get, the information that we receive culturally.
That's wonderful, and I think you answered my next question, but maybe I'll restate it just for clarity. So, would it be fair to say in your pieces that there are maybe two categories of systems? So there's the category of there's the system which you use to create the work, of course, the translation system and the production that goes into that, and then there are these systems that the work is engaging with or interrogating. And maybe could you say a little more about, one, is that a fair assessment? But two, what is the relationship of those systems in the work itself and these bigger political and cultural, linguistic, musical systems that you're invoking in the work? So
I promise I'll go through this quickly. I don't want the hook to come out, right? This whole project, Manifestos, is an investigation of archival text, political text of one sort or another. In the early days, I actually worked with manifestos themselves. Manifestos written, by, for example, Stokely Carmichael or Frantz Fanon. In the last several manifestos, I began working with decisions, court decisions, usually Supreme Court decisions on major cases. And earlier I worked with the Dred Scott decision. I would use as bookends, for example, in that one, the minority and the majority decision and the dissent, and I would put them side by side, and so that you could experience this contradiction, different arguments within the context of sound, and so in this series I work I'm working with the Plessy v. Ferguson trial that happened in the late 1800s, and that's the Plessy v. Ferguson, and then more recently, the Brown v. Board of Education, because they're bookends. One argued that that separate but equal was justified, given the fact that legally the Supreme Court decided that, yes, American citizens should be treated equally, and they decided that segregation did not violate that idea of equality. And it was basically, if you read the text, it's basically because they said ultimately black and white people aren't the same. So they're just responding to the natural forces of nature. And the Brown v. Board argued that Thurgood Marshall made the argument, and the decision said that they reject the Plessy idea of separate but equal because they decided that American, African Americans were citizens, but separate but equal did not give equal opportunity because they gave the advantage to the white citizens over the black. Now, the thing that I was interested in was the fact that both of these decisions were argued using reason and logic. That is that what is compelling is that the jurors had to consider whether the argument, whatever it is, for or against segregation, had to be rational. And they had this like wacky, like I don't know what to say, that as long as you're logical, then you're reasonable. That you've taken yourself out of the subjective realm of that judgment, or the realm of the issue that you're trying to make a judgment about. And I thought that, well, in both cases, whether you're arguing for or against segregation, the judgments are subjective. And to show this is to show that both arguments are equally logical, but based upon different assumptions. And those assumptions what the value of those assumptions depends upon where you are in time, and which explains that difference. Now, I see then taking this idea of taking the irrational and placing it against the rational, or the subjective, and I wouldn't call subjectivity irrational. Excuse me, I apologize for that. But taking the subjective and placing it against the rational, to say that the rational can be an observation of reality, my assumption is that that's not true, and the work takes the same structure. It takes the irrationality of the system and posits it against the subjective experience of an event that the system has to rule over. And my whole argument is that judgment that's thought to be a rational observation of a reality, a real situation like segregation, is actually a subjective judgment that has nothing to do with the lived experience of segregation. And that it is really driven by emotion. Now, that's why emotion and affect is important in my music, because it's emotion and affect that makes you think that if you find a relationship between what's going on in the text and what you hear in the music, that's a subjective judgment. There is absolutely no relationship, like absolutely no relationship. Even if it's intended, it is unrelated. And we make that relationship through cultural agreement. Boy, I'm going off the handle here.
Well, and you're doing a good job of keep anticipating my next question in each one of those, which I'll just ask one more question and then we'll open it up. But just thinking about this kind of juxtaposition of these contradictory layers, and thinking about what the experience is for people in this room as we hear and experience these pieces, seeing the scrolling text, which was the source of the entire piece, hearing this beautiful music played very musically, very intuitively, and bringing each one of our voices into it. And then in the second part, as you've done in a few of your pieces, introducing the voice, which is this other layer of vocalizing, giving life to some of these words, which you're also seeing, and it's adding these different layers. And I just wonder if you already kind of said it, but again, like what kind of experiences that facilitates in the room experiencing this, removed from the actual history of what it's interrogating?
Yeah, that's a little difficult to answer, but I'll make it shorter than the other answer. That it was Manifesto 6 that I initially used voice. And what I discovered was that the voice encapsulated this whole question I had about the relationship between what we think is the rational and the irrational experience. Principally because the voice is coming from a person, the voice is in speech, and it is the issue of speech itself that introduces the issue of culture. And the instrumentation, we can abstract that a little bit more and see that the emotions and passions that come from the sound of instruments comes from the quality of the instrumental sound, and which is true, but my point is that it's actually coming from the same source that we find more easily accessible in the voice. It's simply that if you read a statement and you hear a statement spoken, that spoken statement feels and means something different than the read statement, even though the read statement it would be something that is a wholly legitimate experience. It goes to an entirely different thing, but it feels like you're actually more in the moment. And the idea of being in the moment is the thing that gives a sense of reality. The sense of reality is something that has been used to make the argument that legitimizes our subjectivity, that our subjectivity is the real reality. But my point is that it is simply the instrument of the voice that gives the impression of reality, or gives the condition of reality. It's not our subjectivity. And so theoretically, we get a more direct experience of what we're feeling and hearing and connecting when we hear just instruments.
It's very interesting. Thank you. I should share the microphone. We have time for a couple questions. And we have some people to help facilitate that. So please raise your hand if you have something.
I think they're scared.
John, can you tell us a little bit about your experience in terms of working on this music, conducting it, editing it, and your collaboration over the years?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, it's such an interesting and unique and wonderful experience that I'm privileged to have. And I get to kind of get inserted into this process at a few different points, which is always so interesting. It starts with a text, and I've trained in Charles' translation system, and I do the thing, and you're kind of executing a series of steps. And then you end up with some kind of document, and at that point, it's a melody with chords, and you voice it, but it's nothing like what we hear now. And then Charles takes it and does his thing, and then on these projects that I've been able to direct and put together for performance, we come back, and it's incredible the music that he creates with this, kind of bizarre material. And then, I was talking with Charles earlier. I was like, I feel like there's a very conscious decision in the process to then just kind of hand it off and let musicians be musicians, because we all have training, cultural learning, and all this stuff in how to do music and be expressive and do all those things. And we do that the very best that we possibly can. And we find all this amazing stuff to mine out of that. But then it's getting into all this interesting territory of like language and musical language alongside the text itself. So it's really, like I said, it's really wonderful for me to kind of be able to see that come full circle when it comes to me.
I have to say about that I've learned so much from John about composition it just goes to show you when you're a truly trained musician. He gets mad at me because
he
I
is
would
a trained
say that,
musician.
right? So, but I learned so much about composition, and what he said about. And this is pretty much standard. A conductor will shape a piece of music according to what they think are interesting. But this is more than any other situation. John is given a blank slate. And because I treat John as a found object, just like I treat the archive. And what happens is that in every project we've been in, after he and the musicians shape it, my mouth is open because there were things going on that I never would have imagined, never could have projected. And it really says that I'm relying on a separate experience to add to this aggregate of experiences that are actually put together in segments. And in other words, I never have an overall view of what I'm doing. I'm just working one or two measures at a time, not knowing what the next measure is going to do. And I never know what's going to happen when another part of the structure, for example, John makes his edits and creates the formation. It's like experiencing something new continuously. It's really a nice way to make art.
Agreed. I think there's time for one more question.
Charles, I was wondering how working with John and these incredible musicians have informed your visual practice.
Yeah, well, I don't think they're separated. So I think they are operating out of the same set of ideas. It's just I'm working with different materials. And what is surprised me, because I didn't actually discover the idea of working with music as a part of my practice. I didn't really discover that until maybe 10 years ago. I mean, it wasn't very long ago. And that's maybe the most surprising, that whereas in the let's say the language work or the grid work, I'm working with either language system structures, syntactical structures, or in the grid work I'm working with numbers. And in music I'm working with the elements of music theory, notes and scales and so forth. And that I'm able to manipulate them or work them or apply them to a systematic process. Each, both in visual and hearing, apply each to a systematic process using the same theory of application.
Well, I think we better wrap it there, but thank you so much, Charles, for sharing your thoughts and